is Jean Truelove from Truelove Quilts for You. I'm going to be doing a fairly in-depth tutorial today on what I call my 5 diamonds quilt. Very simple half square triangle quilt that I've been talking about. My tutorial to follow is the body of the quilt. I just stuck the borders on because I was actually waiting for some fabric for my borders to arrive. In my tutorial I tell you that I was going to be using some fabric that I pulled from my stash, but I didn't like anything. I've not bought fabric for a while from the last quilt show. I bought this fabric line. So I had gone online and I bought the fabric for the borders, which actually fabric, it goes in and out, or it goes out of print. I'm sure you realize that. So if you see some fabric, people always ask me how much fabric do I buy. If I like it, I buy 3 yards. No, 2 yards, 2.5 for borders or whatever. If I love it, I get 5 yards. And if I can't live without it, I'll get 7. That way I can have backing, I can have several quilts, I can have borders, I can have blocks. Because if I love something and then it goes out of print, you're done. So I was waiting for my border print, that's all. And I got it online at Amazon Marketplace, a company called Camp Creek Quilting on Amazon Marketplace. I ordered this border fabric just a few days ago and it came very quickly. So that was my border fabric that I put on this quilt. But I just wanted to show you, this obviously is a very graphic black and pink and white quilt, but I just wanted to show you I have made this quilt pattern about, I would say, 15 to 20 times in the last 20 years or 15 years of my quilting journey, because it's so very easy. There are steps to follow to prepare your half square triangles, which the body of the quilt is just half square triangles. There's 96 squares, half square triangles in the body of this quilt. To prepare them takes some time and some precision, but it's not hard. This is a beginner quilt, but I wanted to just share with you very quickly before I get to my tutorial some of the different quilts that I have made with this pattern and how different the pattern, the fabric value and the fabric placement can be. Now this is a quilt that I had done, and it's a very sort of shabby chic. Now you can't really see it, but there's sort of these 5 diamonds are in this quilt, in like the lavenders, and then the rest of it is cream. And this is a very soft quilt. Actually, this is before I started making this, before I started curving the corners of my quilts. Oh, and I hand stitched the binding. I hand stitched nothing. This tells you how old this quilt is. That's funny. I was working for the while with very low volume fabrics, very sort of shabby chic, very sort of just soft. These quilts have been washed and done to death. That's why they're so soft. Here's another one, same exact pattern, and there you can see with the borders, with a bunch of borders added, and it made a larger quilt. There's this quilt here, which is sort of, as you can see, the diamonds are sort of in a brown, in the browns, and then the border print. Same exact pattern. Look how different it looks. Now this one, I've made a lot of wedding quilts with this pattern. This quilt is very low volume, very much. And it is almost just pure cream. But I show you how to use different fabrics. Scrappy quilt, it would be awesome to use up your scraps. But this quilt, which I'll take pictures of, this quilt, the light here, the light here is just yardage. I just cut out of yardage. You could do this quilt in 2 colors, black and white, cream and white. Just cut 46 blocks of light, 46 blocks of dark. That's what this quilt is. And then this one is, as I say, very low volume. Again, this is very old. Been loved and worn to death. So there's that quilt there. So pretty. I'll never get rid of these. Now, we are still in lockdown here in Pennsylvania. We're in the yellow zone. And this is the 3rd month. We're going into it, 3.5 months worth. I've only been out of the house a handful of times, literally. I just wasn't wanting to get stuck in to a big project. I really wasn't. This was one of the biggest projects. So I started pulling from my blues. I started pulling, what I wanted was for my diamonds more to be like a tealy eggs, robin eggs blue, and the rest of it to be sort of the yellows, the creams, and the pinks. So this quilt's on my bed, the bottom of my bed, and this is the exact same pattern. My 5 diamonds. It's a larger quilt, as you can see, and the diamonds, as you can see, are the blue, and then the other fabrics are the fabrics, sort of the chevrons that go around. I was very thrilled with this quilt here. I was so pleased. As I said, it grew. This is the back of my quilt, and I had it's sort of like a double wedding ring printed fabric. Sweet. I ran out of it, so I put a little bit of pink at the top. But this quilt, I just started adding borders to the actual body of the half square triangle, same exact quilt. But I wanted to share with you, you might notice that this quilt is not quilted yet. Obviously these all are quilted. I just got this quilt a couple weeks ago from a long arm quilter. Now I have made over I've made over 400 quilts in my quilting history. I've only been quilting for about 15 years. I'm very quick. I had to be. I have a large family and I got on with it. That's from placemats to baby quilts to king size quilts. I've made a lot of quilts. And I have quilted 9/10 of them on my home domestic machines. I have a brother, I have a Husqvarna, and now I have a Juki. I've quilted most of my quilts. I have sent away 2 or 3 quilts to a long arm quilter that I found, who's very competitively priced, very quick turnaround, and that's what I like about him. His name is David Hurd. His company is Quilting by David. You can look him up, quiltingbydavid.com. I'll put the link down below, and you can go to his website. He has dozens and dozens of patterns that they load your top, your batting, and your backing onto a machine, and they run the threaded machine over your quilt. And I will take some close-up pictures of this quilt that I just got back from David. Oops, I just got this quilt back from David. I chose a sort of a softer quilting pattern on this, since it's so angular. But for this quilt, I want an angular pattern because it's so graphic, the black and the whites. I'm going to go to his website, Quilting by David, and choose more of an angular quilting pattern. But I just want to recommend David. He does a beautiful job, very competitively priced square inch. And the thing is, as I said, he gets your quilt back to you very much. Now, a lot of you who may be new will say, well, I don't want to make that size quilt. I want to just make a small baby quilt. I'm going to be including a photograph. I just printed it off of Pinterest. There are a whole bunch of them. It's a half square triangle cheat sheet. So I cut these squares, 96 of them, 48 light, 48 dark, at 6 7/8 of an inch. But say if you have a 5-inch square, your cheat sheets will tell you how to cut them to get your finished block. These were all cut at 6 7/8, so I end up with a 6-inch finished block, 6-inch half square triangle. But I'm just going to enclose this. I'm just going to put this up, this cheat sheet here, and also I am going to obviously include the pattern for the quilt, which I just took a piece of copy paper, and because I don't know downloads and PDFs files, I don't know how to do that. Sorry about that. So maybe you can take a screenshot or just study this. I took a piece of copy paper. It's 8 blocks across, 12 rows down. And then I took a Sharpie and I filled in the actual dark, light placement of each block. Once you have prepared your blocks, your squares, your half square triangles, it's so easy. You just sew row by row, 12 rows. Simple, simple, simple. So I have a picture of that. Oops. And yeah, so I do hope that you enjoy making this. It's a very, very quick quilt. As you can see, very versatile in your look. You can do a 6-inch and just add borders, which I did with this one. These are three larger borders, which made a nice, decent size quilt on my it's not a king size quilt, but it's going on the bottom of my king size bed. And the quilting is so very pretty. So obviously I will be showing you when I get my quilt back from David Hurd, Quilting by David. So yeah, so I hope you enjoy the tutorial to follow. I finish up by showing you just the body of the quilt, but it's all finished now. I'll choose my backing. I'll fold up my top and my backing, not the batting. He has a selection of batting, so you just fold up your top, your backing 4 inches bigger on all sides for a long arm, and then he will quilt it with his batting, the batting of your choice, and the pattern of your choice. He has dozens of them. I would heartily recommend David. So yeah, shout out to David, and thank you all again for your support. I hope you enjoy the tutorial to follow and find it informative and easy. It's not a quick quilt, but it is easy once you do all of your steps. I think you'll enjoy it. So again, thank you folks, and keep healthy, keep safe. Crazy times we're living in, crazy not so times we're living in. But yeah, so stay home, or if you have to go out in the working world, essential workers, please be careful. We're thinking of you all. All right, love from the Trueloves. I hope you enjoy this. All right. Mistaken. I just unwrapped this Riley Blake fat quarter, and I must have gotten it at a quilt show when I was with Jen, because I unwrapped it and I thought I'd gotten a Missouri Star, and it actually came with a Villa Rosa design pattern. Now you know that I love these Villa Rosa design little pattern cards. If you go on here, villarosa.com, villarosadesigns.com, it's a little 3x5 or 4x6 card, and you actually get a complete little pattern. And they made up this fat quarter mixture of fabrics to make this pattern, which is called Pandemonium. And then they give you the instructions on how to make this little quilt here. So I thought I had gotten that elsewhere, but I do remember now it was at the last quilt show that Jen and I went to. So I have a little pattern, but I'm making my own pattern. So what I'm doing is I'm separating my black pieces, my white and pink, and I don't think I'm going to be using the green. There's only 2 greens, so I'm going to be putting my pinks over here, my whites, and then my blacks. And so when I look back, when I look at them, I like this. I think it's really, really pretty. And again, these are sweet little small prints, as you can see. And then I'm going to audition to see if I like the larger prints that I've put on. And I think I do like that one. I'll add a little bit of punch, because when I look at this fabric here, I sort of see this fabric also here. It's a little bit bigger and it's a little bit bolder, whereas these are very small little prints. But I want a little bit of punch, and this fabric here and that fabric there gives it. And the same here. Yeah, so the same. I like my black and white dot here. I like that has dots. This has dots on it. This is a sweet little white print. And my black and white dot go very nicely on there. And then my pinks, make sure everything is, I like it, is the black pops up here. It's going to be pretty. The little black paw prints. And then that pink. So yeah, I like that. Has a little bit of green, but that'll add a little bit of interest, but I'm not using the green. So now I'll just put these to the side. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be cutting out, I'll put these to the side. I'm just going to start cutting out my 6 7/8 inch squares out of my fabric here. What I will do is I'm going to go over and I'm going to iron my fat quarters that have been in the that have been all wrapped up here. And what I'm going to do is I'll square it all up really nice, and then as I said, I'm going to find my 6 7/8. So say that's all squared up. That has a little selvage on it, and this is rough. But just to show you, here's my 6 7/8 inch right there. There's my 6 7/8 inch, and then over here. So that's the size, approximately. That's the size of our square that we're going to be using. But right now, I'm gonna iron all of these, and I'm gonna start cutting out my 6 7/8 inch squares. 48 of them. So I'm ready to cut out my squares, and I've just figured out I will only be able to get 4 almost 7-inch squares out of my fat quarters here. I can only get 4 with a little bit of extra, with some leftover for another project. So I have my ruler here. So what I have done is these fat quarters came with a large 1/2-inch set selvage. Oh well, what are you gonna do? I gotta cut this selvage off here. So I've ironed these. There's 4 of them on here. These fat quarters. So I obviously have to cut off all of these selvages here. So what I'm doing is I'll cut that off, those selvages, and then I'm gonna neaten up the bottom edge here of my fabric. Come over here. I'll neaten this up here. Let me just see if they're all, yeah, some are much smaller. Oh wow, yeah. So I'll neaten up this edge here. And then I'll start to, because now I have a nice square corner here. Now I will start to cut my 6 7/8 inch squares. Again, I will find my 6 7/8 inch square there, and then I'll come down here and I'll find it, and this is a nice square corner. I've squared it up. It's nice on my cutting mat. Everything is lovely and square. It's fairly important as you are, even if you're beginning, to try to get this nice and straight. Now what I could do is I could probably just cut I could cut a 6 7/8 inch strip and then subcut it, but I'll cut the squares. You can do it that way if you wanted to just cut right up here and then cut 6 7/8 inches. Actually, I think I'm gonna just do it this way. I'm gonna cut my square. There's all sorts of ways to cut. Some people are probably out there going, oh my gosh, why is she doing it that way? But you can cut your own squares. You can cut squares here, or you can cut strips and subcut them. And there are squares straight away right there, and I'm just gonna come up here, find my 6 and 7. So as you can see here, I have cut 48 black, as it were, 48 black, and I have cut 48 white and pink. And I have alternated when I've laid it out here. To my mind, it's fairly important rather than doing it incredibly randomly. I've done white, pink, white, pink, white, pink, white, pink, okay? Because I'm using the 2 colors for my light color, the pink and the white, and then the black, all patterns for my black. And I've made sure that I don't have 2 of the same prints together. I think that the color placement is pretty important. even though you're doing a random quilt, you need to have some kind of semblance of order going, whatever. So this is what I've done here. I have my 45. Now my next step, oh, I did not use that bigger black and white print. I didn't use that. This is my biggest print here, and the other one just didn't go. So really it's going to be a black and white sort of quilt here, but with my shades of pink. I did use, I have a lot of my fat quarters left over, and I saved the little tie here, and I'm going to put that back in my shelf because that's I didn't use as many. I didn't use a lot of them because especially the white and the pink, because I had more, if you remember, than I did the black. So now what we're going to do is, I've already started. What we're going to do on the white or the lighter fabrics that you have, you're going to take a ruler and you're going to be drawing. It's going to take a little while. I'm just using a pen. You can use some kind of marker. You're going to be drawing a diagonal, just from one end to the other. And then what I'm going to do is, if you can see, I'm going to be putting these back in the like white, pink, back on top of each other. Okay, so I sort of keep, I mean, it's not really all that important. You know me, I don't sweat the small stuff, but sometimes I just put this back. I quite like doing it, so I have semblance of order here. So I'm just going to continue. I'm going to continue marking. If you go from the middle, on out when you're marking, sometimes your pen or your marker can drag if you pull it. So I find sometimes I just go from the middle and I make my marker. So I'm just going to continue doing this. I'm going to mark all of my light fabrics. So there we go. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these in this order, and I'm going to put these in a nice little pile here, and I'm going to start taking this. I'm going to put the piles right next to each other, and I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to put the pretty sides together, just as I pull them off, the pretty sides together off of the piles, the whites and the blacks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain stitch. This is the easy part of this quilt. Having done the fabric cutting and our marking, I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch right alongside one side all the way down 48 squares. The white side on the top all the way down. I'm going to chain piece it. Then I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to turn them all around, all 48, and I'm going to come back, put my needle down, and I'm going to come back right on the other side, excuse me, of that marked line. So I'm going to put all these in a pile, and I'm going to take them over to my sewing machine now. So as you can see, I'm at my machine, and if you've been following me, you know I like to have my things sort of set up right next to each other. Doesn't look like I have a lot of room, but it's okay. So what I'm doing now, I'm just scratching. I'm putting the pretty sides of the fabric. Remember, pretty side to pretty side, always, right sides together. And I'm following that line. I am sewing on the other side. I've marked the line, and I'm sewing next to the line. All right, I'm sewing next to that line, 1/4 of an inch. Now I know that my presser foot here, when it runs along the side of that line, as I follow that line with the side of my presser foot, that my stitch is a 1/4 inch away from the line. So I just follow that along. If you're new to this, This is called chain piecing. Okay, and as you can see, I've made it easy that when I flip over my my marked pieces, I can just grab my darks and I can grab my lights and I can just keep chaining them together. I can just chain them right together, and that's what it's called. You might need a little help raising your presser foot, but I'm assured that that's a 1/4 inch away from my marked line. And I will just continue. So I'm coming to the end of my first row of stitching. As you can see, I've stitched them all together on one side, and if you're new, you may not have realized what I meant. Now I will keep my needle down. That's the end one. I'll keep my needle down, and I'll just, oops, I'll pull this out, my thread out, and here's all my 48 squares sewn together. All of this whole lot. Well, they just follow, they just chain after one another, right? So I'm going to pull my needle, my thread out here, just give it a little bit of a tug, and then you can see that I can go right down. I can just go right down. Let me just put that here. I can just go right down the other side of my line with my 1/4 inch foot, just like that. It didn't take me long. As I said, I'm making a big song and dance about this quilt. But it really does, once you get going, you've cut your squares, it really does work up very quickly with your chain piecing. Just a little bit of thought that I think. And as you can see, my squares are just following beautifully because they're attached to each other. And then when I'm all done these 48, sewing these together, then we're going to cut them. And as you can see, the half square triangle, that's what's going to be made. We're going to cut between that, we're going to cut actually on the line, we're going to cut on the line, and then we will have, out of this one patch here, we'll have 2 half square triangles, the exact same. So I'm just going to continue sewing down the other side of my squares here. Following along, one after another. It's really quite satisfying. So I'll just continue doing this until I'm done, and then I'll show you what I do next. Finished chain piecing all my bits, and now what I'm going to do is all I'm doing is I'm cutting apart my threads that are holding my pieces together, and I'm just putting them in a pile over here, the exact way. I'm just pulling them off so that the line is going the stitching's going the exact same way. It just makes it easier to make a nice, neat pile to do our next step. So I'm just going to finish cutting all of my chains a bit. There's a lot of way people can cut chains apart. They have a like a seam ripper and they just whack it on. I just cut them with my little scissors, and as you can see, they just follow one after another. So there are, what, 48 of these that I have to cut apart, and yeah, I'll just put them in a nice pile and I will go on to my next step. I finished cutting apart the chains on my patches here, and now again, just a repetitive process. What we're going to be doing is I'm going to be putting my ruler on the line. Now I'm assured when I cut that I have 2 half square triangles with a 1/4 inch seam right there. If you've sewn them good enough, if you've sewn them perfectly like you should have, then you don't have to worry about cutting that stitching apart, because you're cutting on the marked line. Now what I am going to do is I am going to make 2 piles. I'm going to make 2 separate piles, and I will tell you why I'll do that later. I'm just going to cut all of these bits apart, And just as they come off my table here, off my ruler, I'm going to put them in 2 different piles. So I'm just going to continue cutting my bits apart. Again, a repetitive is So I'm over at my ironing station, and we're just going to iron these open. I have put my 2 identical piles, one here and one here. I've been working on this pile here. I like to just be a little bit organized. By all means, you can, however you iron it. I just grab, when I'm pressing over to the dark side, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm just putting them on, now they're on top of each other, but when I'm grabbing, I can just grab the dark side, roll that over, push it over, and then press that up to the dark. As you can see, I have really black and white and pink. So I just keep doing this, and I'm going to keep my 2 separate piles because my quilt is going to be, it doesn't have to be if you're doing a scrappy quilt, but my quilt is going to have the same exact top and bottom rows. There's going to be 6 rows identical in one pile, and then the next 6 rows are going to be the same configuration. By all means, you don't have to do it that way, but I'll show you as I go along. That's why I'm doing my 2 piles. So my quilt it's sort of the exact same top and bottom when you look at it. You won't really, I mean, yeah, take a blind person to see it, but you won't really notice it. But I quite like to do it that way. Keep in order. But again, if you're doing scraps, my goodness, just grab your dark or your medium and light, or your dark. So I've pressed everything, I've ironed everything. I have my 2 identical piles. What I'm doing now is a very tedious task, and you might think, oh, this is ridiculous. You've sewn everything lovely, you've marked everything lovely, and you have basically, this is a 6.5 inch square, and yes, there's my 6.5 inch ruler. Works perfectly, works super, right? Well, I wanted to show you, if you're a beginner, if you're a new person, I want to show you, this is a 6.5 inch ruler, okay, with a diagonal seam, corner to corner. Now I've sewn these corner to corner. Again, if you're new, if you're quilters, you know exactly what I'm going to be doing. This is a process called squaring up, okay? That diagonal line on my ruler is going to go right on that diagonal line on what is my 6.5 inch. This is 6.5 inches now. Okay, so you're thinking, oh, that's pretty perfect, right? Well, it's okay. It's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rotary cutter, having put that line on my having put the diagonal line on my diagonal line perfectly, because I've sewn it pretty well. There's just little, I mean, come on, right? Just little tiny slivers here. And you're thinking, oh, it takes forever to do that. Why are you doing that? Because your block is really lovely. You just have a few little bits there, right? Take that little dog ear off. So you end up with a perfectly square block with just a few little bits here. Well, I haven't touched this pile. I've done what? Not even half of this pile, squaring up my blocks. And yeah, I got these little bits right here. Let me just show you, bring it into the screen. Look at that. Look at that. What I have gotten off these few blocks. Yeah, just a little shred here, just a little corner there, but look at that. When you square up all of that fabric, all of this excess, which doesn't make your block perfectly square. These are now perfectly square. That's a perfect 6.5 inch square. So when you see a pattern or something, or somebody tells you, oh, have you squared up your blocks? Let me tell you honestly, when I first started quilting, I didn't square up. I thought, oh, come on, I've sewed them well enough, that's fine. And then my points didn't match. They were a hair off. Sometimes they don't even match now because I don't pin perfectly. As you know, I'm not a perfect quilter. But when I started, when my husband came in, who does everything very, very nice, he says, well, if a job's worth doing, Jean, it's worth doing right. I'm like, I don't want to take, half hour to square these silly blocks up, right? But when I started doing it a while ago, I realized, oh my word, because we're not machines, because we're not robots, we can't sew perfectly. We can't make a perfect block after we've cut it and after. So what I'm saying is, as I keep reiterating, this is not a hard quilt. This is just not tedious, but you need to do step by step in order to get a nice result. And this is one of the more important steps. I think every step is important. Obviously you're cutting out, obviously you're stitching together, your 1/4 inch, you're marking, you're stitching, you're ironing, and now you're trimming up. And we haven't even come to the piecing part, but once you get this done, once you do this, the quilt comes together fairly quickly, as you will see. So I'm just going to take my time. I'm doing this. What I have done here is I'm keeping my piles exactly. I'll touch that later. I'm keeping my piles exactly. So this was like this. Just as you can see, it's the same exact block. And all I'm doing is when I'm squaring this block up, I'll square it up and I'll just turn it over onto there. And so when I turn it back, perfectly squared up blocks, it'll be the exact same. And then I'll do 2 piles, and I bet I'm going to have a big nest, a big bird's nest of fabric there, which is amazing. You think you've done it right? And trust me, you haven't. All right, so now I have finished squaring up there are 96 blocks. It is a little bit of a task to do that, but I'm telling you, if you speak to any quilter, you want to do things right. You want to set some guidelines down. If you're a beginner quilter, this is pretty much a necessary task to get your blocks as good as possible. Now, as I was showing you, I was using this Omni Grip ruler. This is a 6.5 inch ruler. There are all sorts of different tools and rulers. There's something called a block tight or something like that, a block ruler that sort of just pushes up against this seam, and then it makes it easier. If you look online or if you Google it or something, there's maybe half a dozen different types of rulers, gadgets and gizmos to make this squaring up process. I'm okay with using my ruler or even a larger one, but it has to have, of course, the line. Where is it? Right there. To match up with your half square triangle. So I have finished, but if you're saying, well, that's really unnecessary task, I want to show you. Look at that. Oh my word. Look at that. I thought I really did my blocks really good, but I belong to a few Facebook pages, and I put this on a Facebook page, and people are like, oh yeah, look at my pile. Look at that extra fabric. Just little slivers. Look, just little slivers. You're thinking, oh, come on, this is ridiculous. Or these little dog ears here. But boy, does it make a difference. This is a quilt that has 96 blocks. We got rid of all of that extra stuff right there. Shocking amount of threads and frays. Okay, so that's that. So you can see that's a fairly important job to get done. However tedious it is. Now comes the exciting part. We've done all of the preparatory work for our simple quilt, and here is, again, as I showed you before, here's our pattern. And what this is, if you've printed it out, oh, there's lots of shadows on here. I'm so sorry. Let me try to see if I can get. Yeah, oh, I'm in the shadows. Sorry about that. There's my pattern. Let me just get that out of the shadows. Again, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to take, actually I'll do it right here. I'm going to take I'm going to get rid of this one pile. I'm going to be working with one pile only, okay? I'm going to put this down here. Let me see if I can just go up a little bit. So now, what you're going to do, your pattern is very important at this point. What you're going to do is you can see that our number one, my number one row, number one block, my dark is in the corner. Very, very simple. My dark is like that, okay? It's on the bottom right hand. Now my number two is going at the top left corner. Okay? Number three, I'm making a point. There's my point. Number four, we're going to be constructing this quilt row by row. All right? You can see immediately, excuse me, I'm going to just come over like this. You can see immediately, just setting it out on my table here, how this quilt is coming together. So very, very simply. And to my mind, very effectively. Now, this one is going this way. And sometimes I get a little bit confused. You really have to look. So, row 1, block 6, and that goes up like that. Am I still? Yeah, I'm still on the. And then block 7 goes like that, making another peak, and then I'll finish off with block number 8. Now, again, so as you can see, just look at that, just the beginning, just in 2 seconds, the beginning of my quilt. So very, very simple. Now, as you can see, what I've done is, as you can see, it's like white, pink, white, pink, white, pink, white, pink, but then black. But the pink and the white add a little bit of interest. So again, contrast. This quilt is all about your contrast, whether it be a low contrast or a high contrast, which this is. I've made it one other time in a high contrast. So, but then I quite like this as a very subtle quilt. I've made this for weddings also in the people's colorways. So now, again, I have this other pile. I'm going to put this to the side. I'm not going to touch that yet. And I'm working with this pile here. So now I'm going to just go over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to pick this row up. This is exactly how, I'm exactly sure that my placement of my first row is good. And I'm going to be putting 1 over 2, 2 over 3, 3 over 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my machine, and again I make sure that my pattern is right next to me. Even though this is good, I'm going to go over, and I'm going to have that. I'm going to go, this is row number, this is 1, and what are we going to do? Pretty size to pretty side. 1/4 inch seam, pretty side to pretty side, 1/4 inch seam right there. Grab number 3, pretty side to pretty side. Okay, now some of these are going to be nesting and or matching, and that's what you want. You want your 1/4 inch at the top. Since we've sewn them and cut them, they're going to really work out well. We should get some really decent points here. Everything should be 1/4 inch away. So I'm just going to go over to my machine, and I'm going to start making my row by row. And if you think that's 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little seams that big. Doesn't take long at all. And then you're working on your second quilt, your second row. And as I said, this works up very quickly after you get all this preparatory work done. So I'm going to then go, I'm going to do this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my ironing board. I'm going to set my seams, and I'm going to press all my seams that I've done in my row 1 all one way, my row 2 all the other way. But I will be back, and I'll show you my progress. Okay, I'm over here at my ironing board, and what I've already done is I've started the first row. Now, let me see if I'm in the frame. Yeah. So now what I will do is I've just set the first row down, and I'm going to set all of these seams. All right, I'm going to set all of these seams, which means just going along like that. Again, sinking the threads, the stitches into the fabric, and I mean, if you've been watching me, you know you're probably bored with me saying it. Ironing, to me, and pressing is so vital in quilting. This, I'm gearing this again towards new ones. And now this row, what I'm going to do is I can feel all of my seams here are going one way. So I've set my seams, and without pulling too hard, I can just feel that these seams are going this way. And I'm going to alternate each row. I'm going to alternate the next row that I do, my seams will be going that way. That means when we nest our seams together, they'll lay nice and flat. Now, as you can see, my points, which I'm not really concerned about, but because I squared up my blocks really nice, as you can see, my points are really 1/4 of an inch. Everything here is 1/4 of an inch, and they're going to be much easier to keep nice and straight, and so my points aren't all that cut off. If they're cut off a little bit, I'm not bothered at all. But that's the whole purpose of squaring up my blocks, as you can see there. So I'm just going to continue with my rows. Now I'm going to go back over, and so I have sewn my first top 2 rows together, and with this contrast, I'm really pleased the way these points are turning out. It would be fairly glaring, my other low volume ones, if I had not done the points really all that well, you wouldn't have seen it. But I'm not bothered, but it's really turning out well because I squared my blocks up. Now I've followed my pattern, and I'm just working on my 3rd row. And you can see how quickly, well, you can't, you weren't here, but you trust me, I've sewn together seven seams there, 7 seams there, 7 seams there. Once you've done your preparatory work, this quilt really works up quickly. And look how effective this is. I had done, as I said before, I had done 1 quilt with a high contrast, but boy, is it effective. And my other one's my low contrast, but this is so pretty. I love it. I love it. And as you can see, all the pinks and the whites, the pinks and the whites, and then the black just makes a real nice splash. So I'm just going to continue working my. So I'm at my machine, and I am attaching my rows together. Again, if you're new, what I have done is, because I have pressed my bottom seam that way and this seam going this way, they nest beautifully together. And what I've done on this seam here, these 7 seams, I've put a pin. Now, a lot of people like to put 2 pins to hold this point together. I'm okay with 1 pin. If it shifts a little bit, I'm fine with that. But I'm just going to start at the top. I'm not going to back stitch because this will be in a border, and I'm very careful to go 1/4 of an inch, which on my machine, my presser foot is riding along the outside of these edges here. Pretty sides together, of course, pretty sides together. 1/4 of an inch. Come to that seam. There's an intersection of seams there. And hopefully I have my points intact. 1/4 inch. I've only worked on this top for just a few minutes, and I have 3 rows together, and there's 12 rows. After you do your 96, there's this quilt is, as I was saying, this quilt is 96 blocks. It's 8 blocks across and 12 rows down. So we're working with our 96 blocks. Or 96 half square triangles, I should say. Yeah, blocks. Okay. So here are my, that's a little bit off. I'll go back and I'll correct that, because you can really see that one's good. You can really see with the black, if you can see that. But I'm really pleased. Let me see. I'm really pleased with the way my points, for the most part, are nice and straight there. 1/4 inch there, 1/4 inch my point there is nice. I'll just go back and just go back, and that actually I can see I sort of went off. I'm usually not worried, but I went off just slightly. It's less than 1/4 of an inch. So I'll go back and I'll just sort of fill that in and ease back into that seam and see if that's any better. Yeah, you see that? I sort of corrected that right there. This one's good and this one's good. So yeah, so I'm just going to continue. So my quilt is growing. I've just taken it off my sewing machine. And what I'm going to be doing right now is I'm going to be setting this seam that I've just sewn. I've just sewn this long seam together. This is my 5th row. We're working up very quickly, very quickly. As I said, the preparatory work takes a little bit of time, but to actually to actually make the quilt top takes very little time. It's just row by row. Now, oh, you can see my 2 diamonds. Can you see that? 1, 2. I'll just show you in a minute. Now, what I do when I want to iron this seam, as you can see, I sort of fluff up my quilt top there, and I sort of pull this where I've already sewn and ironed, okay? And you can see that sort of lump. You see that lump sort of there, that little fold? That means this seam here is going that way. I just sort of nudge it up with my fingertips, right? And then what I do is I just give it a little bit of a spritz of water. And then with my iron, I'm just going to very gently pull this, and I'm just going to just nudge that rolled seam. You see that? I'm just nudging that seam right up there. Okay, and then I'll just pull the top, and then I will iron it, and look how beautifully that irons out. You see that? Really flat. I think the trick to any successful quilt is 3/4 of ironing. I mean, if you iron and iron and iron, if you see a quilt that's not ironed, you can tell. It's all sort of loosey-goosey and all sort of floppy and not very defined. And a quilt will get all that, a quilt will get all quilty and soft and, you know, squishy and all. But when you're making your quilt top, to quilt it, to work with it, it's just so nice to have it really nice and flat. And there, as you can see, there is my 1 diamond there and my other diamond there. Now I've done 5 rows. I'm just going to finish up over here doing the same thing. Sort of loosen it up here, and then I can feel that seam is going up that way. Sort of push it with my fingertips like that. I can feel that. Give it a bit of a spritz, and then with my iron, I'm just pushing and rolling that seam up that way, and then pull it, and then iron it. And there is my 2nd diamond. Ah, so pretty. So pretty. Now, this is, as I'm looking at it, this is very random. There's 2 pieces. There's 2 of the same fabric together next to each other. That doesn't bother me. That doesn't bother me. Maybe my eye will go to that, but it's like, okay. It's random enough that I'm not bothered at all. But if that bothers you, then you can change the patches around. But the way I'm doing it is I'm going to do 1 more row. That's 6 rows, and I'm going to have 6 rows, and then my 2nd set of rows down here is going to be the exact same, right? So I'm working with 1 pile, then I have my next pile that I've not touched, and this pile will be exactly the same as my top. So I have 6 rows identical, and then I start again with 6 rows identical. You don't have to do that. Again, if you're doing scraps, by all means, just have it scrappy, your values, your colors. But I just quite like that. I have the top and the bottom exactly the same. So yeah, so I'm just going to continue. I have finished the top 6 rows of my quilt, and I have finished the bottom 6 rows of my quilt. And when I go to put them together on that seam, you will see that this top and this top here are identical. That was the point of my 2 piles. I connected 48 blocks on that top and 48 blocks down here, and I'm going to just put them together. Now, this is my quilt, and it's evolving, and as you can see, oh, it looks like eyes. I'm looking at like eyes. It is so funny. I was going to put on, I'm going to be putting on a border around my quilt, a small inner border and an outer border. However, believe it or not, I'm not pleased with any of the black and whites I have. I think it's a very specific little pattern here that I'm using from the quilt company, the manufacturer. So what I've actually done before the pattern goes out of print, this Meowin' Forever by Riley Blake, I quickly went online and I found some of the, I believe it's this one, this fabric here, that I'm going to get. I got 2 yards of that, so I can use that as a border. I'm not sure if I saw this one or not, but I quite liked that one. That's going to be on the outside, and then I'll probably just bind it in black. But what I'm saying right now is I'm going to just finish my quilt. I'll take a picture of it, and I'll talk about it in the beginning. It'll be twice that big there with this seam here, but it's not quite finished. But the majority of the quilt, minus the borders, as you can see, is done. So I will come back. I will have it bordered. I've talked about, probably I'm going to send this out to David Hurd, the long arm quilter, that because I just don't fancy right now. I just can't wrap my head around it, although it would be easy. I'll talk about that in the beginning also. But I'm really thrilled the way this has turned out. So I'm just going to add this seam here. I'm going to put my whole quilt together, and yeah, I'll finish this. I'll finish what, like 3/4 of the quilt, and I'll show you in a minute. So ta-da! Here is my almost finished 5 diamonds quilt. As you can see, I just stitched the 2 halves together, and if you look carefully, you will see that these 2 halves are exactly the same. That's all. However you would like to configure your contrasting or your light and your darks is up to you, but I've done a real high contrast. This quilt measures about 48 inches wide by about 72 long right now. So when I put borders on it, it's going to be longer, more like a bed quilt, more like a bed size, more than a throw. And actually, I'm looking at this, you could finish this quilt right now. I could just finish that quilt right now and have it as a nice, long, lengthy throw quilt. But I am going to wait until I get my fabric from the manufacturers, from where I've ordered it from, so I can put some borders on the side and make it a little bit bigger. I do tend to make big quilts. And then I will be sending it off to my friend in St. Joseph, Missouri, David Hurd, and his team to long arm quilt it. As you know, and again, I don't usually use a long arm, but right now they're more than welcome to quilt my quilts. So yeah, so this is just a tutorial of the quilt, and even just for beginners, the specifics of having your points match beautifully and your quilt to lay lovely and your blocks to go together well. It's an easy quilt. But again, I keep saying to prepare your fabrics and your blocks. That is what's the most time consuming, not hard whatsoever. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I will be showing you probably in the next couple weeks, after a few other videos I've made or whatever, I'll be showing you the finished product. I will choose a backing from my stash here. But yeah, I'll be showing you the finished quilt when it gets done. So I hope you've enjoyed this, folks. Thank you so much. All right, see ya. Bye.